Good morning and welcome to GI Energy's webinar on energy resiliency and energy savings. This is the second of two webinars designed for the California marketplace that will address the issue of the resiliency of your energy supply. Today we will focus on the technical issues that will help you decide on how to identify and select the right solution for you. Before we get started though, a few ground rules. The remarks will last for about 45 minutes and allowing some time for questions will finish no later than 12 noon Pacific. Lines will be muted throughout the presentation, but please feel free to submit questions using the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. The session is being recorded and will be available online in the next couple of days. Before we get started, we'll be taking a quick 3-question survey about today's topic. Using your smartphone, you can go to menti.com, and that's MENTI.com, and enter the code that I'll give you in a moment. And finally, we'd really like to hear your opinions about today's session, so please email us with any comments and also suggestions on other topics you'd like to hear us talk about. But first, some introductions. My name's John Passmore. I'm a senior sales consultant for GI Energy, and I'll be your moderator for today's presentation. GI Energy designs and develops distributed energy systems for the institutional marketplace, providing resilient, reliable, clean, and cost-effective energy solutions to clients looking to update and future-proof their energy supply. Offering services from feasibility studies through design and construction to operations and maintenance, GI Energy has an established Californian team with deep experience in the regulatory and incentive programs available to local businesses. As an affiliate of Shell New Energies, we also provide access to Shell's abundance of competitive programs and solutions. I'm joined today by a colleague from GI Energy, Jeff Bogg, who, based in Anaheim, California, leads GI Energy's Service Solutions segment, a business focused on cogeneration assets from development through to operations and maintenance. He has about 20 years of experience in the industry with a proven track record of developing complex, challenging projects, applying an array of skills developed through leadership roles in financial analysis, commercial structuring, and technology at GI Energy and at other leading companies. We also have a guest speaker today, Carlos Pabon, who's Regional Sales Manager for AB, a company specializing in the design, construction, supply and maintenance of packaged cogeneration systems. Currently based in San Diego, Carlos has extensive experience in cogeneration markets around the world, covering many applications, including natural gas-fueled industrial and commercial systems, and biogas-fueled applications for the municipal and industry-based clients. We look forward to their remarks. But let's quickly turn to our survey. If I could ask you please to go to www.menti.com. And there are 3 questions, and please enter the code 346282. So www.menti.com on your smartphone and enter the code 346282. There are 3 questions, and here you can see the first. Perhaps a little obvious for this type of topic, but is your business or operation dependent on the reliable delivery of electricity? Not a great surprise, I think, that we end up with 100% yes, hence your attendance at today's remarks. Our second question is, across the USA, how many billion-dollar weather and climate disasters do you think occurred in 2019? How many billion-dollar weather and climate disasters do you think occurred in 2019? As you can see, we have an array of opportunities here. The correct answer is 6 to 10. So obviously 40% of you knew what that's about, but that's an astonishing number when we think about it. And our final question is how would you classify any PSPS events that you've actually suffered? Severe, moderate, we got away with it, or you have not been affected at all? Interesting. So interesting split here of opinions. That's people being prepared for the event, obviously, some who've been affected and some who maybe have dodged the bullet. I think on that note, I'm going to hand you over now to Jeff Bogg to start our presentation. Jeff.
Good morning. Am I audible now? Hopefully so. Sorry about that technical glitch with the mute. Appreciate your patience, but thank you, John, and thank you to everyone who has joined us today for what we hope will be a timely discussion on energy resiliency. Certainly based on some of the answers from our Menti survey, it looks like we're speaking with the right audience that has either been affected by PSPS events or may have a concern that it could be a risk in the future for their organization. So just wanted to quickly touch on our objectives for the webinar today. Really, we want to make sure that you have a good, solid understanding of the risks presented by PSPS events. How this could potentially impact future electric prices, and probably most importantly, how the confluence of these trends in California with wildfires, PSPS events, and increasing electricity prices, impact customers, and what can be proactively done to reduce risk and cost to your organization. So. To accomplish that, we have the following objectives. We'll spend a brief amount of time talking about the scope and risks related to PSPS events, talk about potential solutions to protect your organization and make it more resilient from an energy delivery standpoint. We will then bringing in our guest speaker, Carlos Babon from AB, present some perspectives on the installation and operation of cogeneration specifically as a solution for PSPS events. How these solutions can impact your electric bill and result in savings for the rest of the year when you're not suffering through an outage, and Carlos will also talk us through a pretty fascinating case study. So I think most of us here today know the headlines to the story. It really begins with the record-setting wildfire seasons of 2017 and 18, and the resulting legal liabilities under California's reverse condemnation doctrine, which created the conditions for PG&E's preemptive PSPS policy last year. And just to quickly note, reverse condemnation here in California is kind of unique in that it creates strict liability to utilities whether the result of a damage was an accident or negligence. So PSPS was kind of born of that doctrine in part, in terms of proactively de-energizing portions of the electric grid to avoid the strict liability with any fire sparked from PG&E's lines, which was attributed to the fires in 17 and 18 in part. So, and the first PSPS season last year, I think we've all read the headlines. Over 500,000 accounts were estimated to be impacted, resulting in about 2.5 million customers without electricity for periods ranging from a few hours to up to about 2 weeks, depending on where the customer is located on the grid. Looking more broadly at the entire state, because this isn't an issue unique to Northern California and PG&E. About 35 counties experienced 3 or more PSPS events last year, and there were some well-known counties like Sonoma and Napa that suffered through 4 events. All of this is to say, and what we've been told by the utilities and policymakers in Sacramento is that this is really going to be the new normal, and that we should expect at least 5 PSPS events annually that can last anywhere from 2 to 5 days. And again, much of this will depend on where a particular account is located on the grid. So how is this affecting electricity rates? Unsurprisingly, the new legal liabilities and costs created by the fires over the past few years has kind of forced PG&E's hand to harden and redesign their electric transmission and distribution infrastructure. And that is eligible for CPUC approved rate increases. PG&E has advised the PUC that this program will take at least 10 years in order to make the investments to deliver a state-of-the-art grid that minimizes or eliminates the need for PSPS events. So, against that backdrop, there are active rate cases in front of the PUC, which are likely to be approved. As we can see here, and this is all public information, PG&E has filed for transmission and distribution and generation rate increases of 17% and 18% respectively that will take effect with immediate effect if approved this year. And more increases are likely to come in the following years. And this is really against a backdrop of increasing electricity prices in PG&E's service territory, particularly the demand charge component of their bill. And always important to keep in mind, with PG&E coming out of bankruptcy, the last time they did so, which I think was in 2001, rates increased by almost 30%. So it's not difficult to see that hedging against PG&E's increasing electricity costs would have a pretty positive impact to an organization in terms of keeping operational expenses in line in the future. So now that we've talked a little bit about the scope and scale and schedule of PSPS and the response to it, we just wanted to kind of pause here and talk about what's at stake for utility customers in the current PSPS environment, which is likely to be a little different year for year. A lot of the people that we talk to, and really, one of the reasons we wanted to have this webinar is that, as we engage in more of these discussions and there's more awareness around PSPS events, organizations and companies are taking stock of the potential impacts and threats that these events could pose to their business, in terms of disruption to their critical operations, lost production or data, how this could potentially impact relationships with customers, their proprietary and strategic supply chains. Obviously, health and safety, always of paramount concern, particularly for critical facilities, public facilities. And we've been hearing and reading that from a property insurance standpoint that premiums are going up pretty quickly, particularly in high threat fire districts here in California. So whether or not an organization has been directly impacted by a PSPS event, the insurance underwriters may be taking a different view pretty soon. So all this is to say that organizations and companies will be impacted in different ways depending on the nature of their operation and the duration of an outage. And it's fairly easy to identify what the risks are in relation to an outage, but it's extremely difficult to quantify the cost of an outage until after the event occurs, which of course for most organizations will be too late. So, the good news is that there's some ways that organizations can mitigate the risk and proactively manage costs and protect their operations against future PSPS events, and if done so in a prudent manner, also deliver cost savings to their bottom line for the rest of the year. We do recognize that most of our audience today is probably not in the energy business directly, but based on the survey results, you depend on reliable and cost-effective energy supply in order to sustain your business or operation. So what we wanted to do here was just quickly introduce a handful of what we call behind-the-meter distributed energy technologies, sort of presented through the lens of energy resiliency at your facility. Just to quickly note, all of the technologies here and what we're going to be talking about today can be engineered and implemented to operate in a grid isolated island mode under a black sky condition like a PSPS event, or in parallel with the utility grid under blue sky conditions. So beginning at the top with gas-fired electrical generation coupled with thermal energy, we call cogeneration. This is the simultaneous production of electricity and thermal energy services with one prime mover. And we think this is an important one to discuss today because the economics are really almost unprecedented at the current time. The reason for that is natural gas prices, as probably everybody here knows, remain pretty much near historic lows at the moment, due to shale gas economics. And as we saw on one of the previous slides, electric prices in California keep going up every year, as most of you probably know, as California ratepayers. So the cost of producing electricity and the energy savings it produces are really pretty dramatic, at least at this point in time. So Carlos will spend more time talking about that, but we do believe that this is an excellent solution depending on the nature of your business and perceived risk of a long duration PSPS, because natural gas supply, of course, is not correlated with PSPS events, and under most conditions provides a pretty limitless supply of fuel that can last for hours, days, weeks, or even months. But also wanted to talk about renewable energy and storage, which lots of new installations and deployments here in the state, which is really exciting to see. And these can be very attractive solutions as well. either on a standalone basis, but more often, coupled with battery storage or cogen, or as part of an integrated microgrid. And we know that the cost curves for solar, like fixed tilt and tracking equipment, continues to decline, improving the value proposition there. Solar and wind are both eligible for the Rule 21 net energy metering interconnect process, which is a little bit easier to go through. But depending on the level of resiliency that an organization is trying to solve for, the project costs on some of these can increase pretty quickly, based on the duration and need to pair with battery storage. And also, there's limitations, based on, area to install solar and wind, siting considerations. So, we like to think of all of these as tools in a toolbox, that can be tailored, for a given application with given objectives for energy resiliency and cost savings. So I'd like to pause here and hand over the discussion to our guest speaker, Carlos Pabon, who's going to discuss the implementation of cogeneration as a solution to balance energy savings and resiliency goals.
Thank you, Jeff. And a big thank you, of course, to all of our attendees as well for joining us. I would take a couple of minutes to start presenting the concept of cogeneration very briefly, compared to traditional or conventional generation. In conventional generation, we have basically facilities that purchase their electricity from the grid to feed their production process and other electrical loads at the site. These facilities can be manufacturing facilities in the food and beverage industry, pharma, chemical, and also other type of facilities as we'll see later in the presentation, that can be fueled by renewable sources as well. So such facilities usually have a thermal demand as well. For example, they might need steam or hot water in their manufacturing process. And to supply those loads, basically the customer buys fuel, usually natural gas from PG&E or SoCal gas, and combusts that fuel on site to produce whichever energy carrier they need. In other words, in the standard or reference facility, electricity is produced remotely by a third party, in this case the grid, PG&E, SCE, and heat is produced directly on site through a separate process. All in all, to make the story short, those separate processes resulting in efficiency of more or less 60% if we consider reference values for California, and relatively high emissions. Of course, that depends on the energy mix of the utility and other factors, such as the efficiency of the centralized power generators. But for California, we can take a 60% efficiency, maybe a little bit higher, and relatively high emissions, considering the California electrical mix compared to cogeneration. The beauty of cogeneration, and the key word here really is efficiency. First of all, with cogeneration, electricity is generated at the point of consumption directly, which means lower transmission and distribution losses. Also, with cogeneration, electricity is generated with a low cost and a low emissions fuel, such as natural gas. And finally, which is maybe the most interesting portion of it, heat can be recovered from a cogeneration plant, and therefore the name cogeneration, which is the simultaneous production of electricity and heat in a single integrated process. That heat that is recovered can be used to produce steam, hot water, chilled water even, or other energy carriers that might be needed at the host facility, which saves on otherwise fuel consumed in traditional generation. All in all, through cogeneration, we basically increase the generation efficiency of those carriers from 65% to 80 or 90%. And through that efficiency precisely, and through the use of a low-cost fuel, we reduce the overall cost for the customer to purchase energy. That can be 20 to 30%, depending on the specific case. And that has really been the traditional driver for cogeneration in California and in other markets across the US and in the world. Basically thinking of our customers' energy bills reduced by 20, 30%. Nevertheless, and this is why we're really having this webinar, there is an additional driver for cogeneration today, and that is resiliency. Maybe let's go to the next slide, please, Jeff, and let's dive in deeper in the topic of resiliency. So what is resiliency? In very simple terms, it's the capability to keep your facility running during an outage. What you see on your screen is a conceptual single line diagram. Technically, what we do is when we install an island capable cogen is to split the load of the customer or of the facility in two. We need to understand with the customer which are priority loads at the facility that need to keep running during an outage, and which are loads that are not needed during such an event. If needed, of course, we can also consider the entire facility to be a priority load, but obviously we need to think of cost. What we do is we split those loads, priority and non-priority loads, with an automatic switch. And basically when there is an outage, the switch opens and the cogen serves priority loads only. When the grid comes back, the switch closes automatically and the facility is fed again by the grid and by the cogen. Of course, this is quite a substantial simplification of the entire argument. In actuality, we need to have a closed look together with the customer at their electrical infrastructure, understand the need for automatic processes. Actually, again, thinking of costs, an automatic island requires different components than what we usually call a blackout start mode, where we restart manually upon a shutdown. So we ultimately need to decide together with the customer what is the optimal solution in terms of technical parameters and costs for that specific facility. Why do we go through this hassle together with the customer, basically? Well, because the ability to avoid outages can be worth a lot of money for our customers. So as I was mentioning before, cogen units were specifically driven by energy savings, but today the value of an outage can be quite substantial at a facility. In the example that you could see in the previous slide, just to give you an example, the savings resulting from efficiency and low cost generation were approximately $500,000 per year. And the resiliency benefit added to those $500,000 per year were up to $120,000. So quite substantial and quite relevant for a cogeneration business plan. So going into this slide in a little bit more detail, this basically shows or wants to show how we usually approach a cogen project. So first of all, we need to understand together with the customer if the site is a good fit for cogeneration. As you've probably seen, a large portion of that is knowing if the facility has coincident electrical and thermal loads. And that's truly where our expertise comes in, as we understand the production processes of our customers linked to the potential to implement cogeneration due to the experience that we have in the industry. Take, I don't know, dairy processors that, for example, have to pasteurize as part of their production process. We need to understand the associated steam demand. We know usually if we're talking about closed loop or open loop systems or closed loop systems with an open portion. If we have a condensate return, what's the temperature of that condensate return? Usually when the temperature is low enough, we can use preheating coming from the cogen unit with hot water coming from the cogen unit to preheat that condensate before it goes into a heat recovery steam generator or into a traditional boiler. So these are the usual concepts that we address together with our customers to understand basically if cogeneration is a good fit for them. If we have good thermal loads, we're basically able to size the facility on an optimum balance and truly maximize the value of the asset. Without good thermal loads, it becomes more difficult to extract value of a cogen plant, and therefore the business plan suffers a little bit. Of course, we have in fact executed projects that can still pencil out if electricity prices from the grid are very high, despite of low thermal recovery. And case in point, if the cogen unit is driven by additional value, for example, through avoided outages. Let's go to the next slide, please, Jeff. And this, what you can see on your screen is basically going in a little bit more detail of what I was discussing before. So through the previous slide, I tried to mostly cover actually the technical feasibility of a cogen plant. But of course, a solid business plan has to back the potential investment for a project to fly or to be financed. And Jeff will cover financing options that are available for cogen units. The economic analysis of a project is also something that we can cover through our know-how, really. And it's the starting point, actually, of our support to the customer. So basically, what you see on your screen is a good old electricity bill of a customer in California. What we do is understand your current energy costs for electricity, also for thermal demand, and calculate what your future costs will be in case you install a cogen unit. And there's quite a bit of experience that needs to go into this process because the Californian tariff structure is not a straightforward one. So in most cases, for example, when a cogen unit is installed, the tariff schedule of the customer will change, capacity charges will change, energy charges will change, and all of those changes need to be accounted for in the business plan for it to be actually accurate and to be of actual value and reflect the potential returns on the investment. So that is something that we can take care of. We usually ask the customer to have a look at your electricity bills, at your thermal bills. We need to understand your electrical infrastructure, also your thermal infrastructure, central utility plants, etc. Then we take your data and basically simulate the operation of a cogen unit, understanding how much will remain to be built by the utility when the cogen unit is in operation. Because, and that's another part of our analysis, a cogen unit should not be sized on your peak load if you're going to stay grid parallel. And usually staying grid parallel is the first level to approach these type of projects. So we usually size on an optimum balance between your peak load and your base load, maximizing the hours of operations of the asset and therefore extracting maximum value out of it. Ultimately, the analysis allows us to present the customer with a business plan that shows whether if a cogeneration unit makes sense or not. In the specific example of your screen, for example, the cogen unit resulted in savings of approximately 280K per year. Of course, for us to understand if that is interesting or not, we need to understand the associated investment if an investment is applicable, or financing options. And again, Jeff will cover that in a little bit. Let's move to the next slide, Jeff, please. So what you see on your screen is a good example, a very interesting example of a cogen project that we executed in Southern California. The host facility is a landfill in this case. And basically what our customer did, before we enter into the detail of cogeneration, what our customer did with the landfill is starting with a landfill that was not separating waste and finishing with a landfill that was. So in very few terms, the incoming waste to the landfill before actually going into landfill is now separated and recoverable, recyclable materials are recovered among those paper, plastics, metals, glass, and also the organic portion of that waste is recovered. So the recyclable materials go into a material recovery facility or MRF, and the organic portion of the recovered waste goes towards an anaerobic digestion facility or ADF, both facilities located directly at the landfill. The MRF generates quite substantial electrical loads to process that separated waste, and that is where the cogen unit comes into play. So there is sufficient load at the facility for the cogen unit to supply on-site electricity and to export surplus electricity to the grid. And this is available through a net energy metering tariff that is available for renewable fueled cogen units. And in fact, these units, precisely the ones that you see on the screen, are fueled by existing landfill gas that is available at the site. So basically the customer takes the landfill gas, produces electricity on site, supplies its on-site loads, avoiding to purchase electricity from the grid, and exports any surplus back to the grid. To give you an idea, the customer is avoiding a cost of 13, 14, 15 cents per kilowatt hour to otherwise buy the electricity, and is generating it at a cost of 6 to 7 cents. So there's substantial savings there. On the other hand, so if we go to the anaerobic digestion facility, the organic portion of the waste that was separated is processed through an on-site fermenter, and biogas is generated. And that generates additional biofuel that fuels another 2 cogeneration units that in this case export all of their generated power to the grid with an incentivized tariff that is available for renewable generation. And that can be done in an industrial facility as well. Maybe that's over the scope of this presentation, but we can discuss after the webinar in case you're interested. So that covers electricity and the revenue generation from electricity from the cogen units. But in addition to that, as we were mentioning before, heat is available to be recovered, let's say, for free from the cogen unit. So basically what the customer does is, in the case of the anaerobic digestion facility, the heat coming from the unit is used to control the temperature of the biogas fermenter, which would otherwise need to be done burning additional fuel. And in the case of the MRF, the unit is running on landfill gas. The exhaust gases are fed directly to a paper drying process. So basically the recycled paper is dried, and therefore an additional value, basically it can be sold for a better price. And the heat coming from the hot water loop of that cogen unit is used to preheat air that is going to be mixed with that exhaust going into the paper drying system. Basically, the customer there is saving on burner tip fuel that would otherwise need to be used to preheat a larger amount of incoming air for the paper drying process. Maybe this is a good introduction for the project, just in very brief terms. Let's go to the next slide, please. So going into the detail of the cogen units, we've been discussing the systems, but we haven't seen the systems in detail. If you focus on the left side of your screen, you will see the conceptual design of a cogen unit. And in this case, we have a packaged cogen unit, which adds substantial value to a project compared to a stick-built system. So all the components that you see on the left side of your screen come pre-assembled from our factory, and all the components that you see on top of the container on the right side of your screen also were pre-assembled at our factory to make sure that everything fits before we send the components to site. So basically, through these package systems that we've been building actually for more than 40 years, the risks and costs and times associated with engineering of the solution are substantially lowered. And also the costs and times and risks for on-site installation are also substantially lowered. So we're talking about an on-site installation that costs a fraction of what it would otherwise cost and is executed maybe in 3 weeks instead of 3 months. So that to tell you about the value of a package unit, going into the detail of the components, if we follow the actual process and the functionality of the plant, we start at the left bottom of your screen with the air intake. So we basically take incoming combustion and ventilation air and use that air to cool the electrical alternator that is coupled to the internal combustion engine. The internal combustion engine and the alternator are usually called a generating set or a genset and are truly the core component of the system. The air then cools the engine and leaves through the air outlet. Going back to the engine, basically we take that incoming combustion air, mix it with incoming natural gas or biogas, and you can see the gas train in yellow on your screen. And we combust the fuel in the engine. Low emissions engine produces electricity. And then we go towards the outside of the unit, towards the top of the unit to the exhaust gas pipeline. Staying with the left side of your screen to cover the balance of plant components. So we have a secondary container that includes the heat recovery system in the center. So as mentioned, heat can be recovered through the cogen unit, and that heat comes from 2 sources. The source number 1 is the engine cooling system. So basically, there's a hot water loop that is keeping the engine at nominal operating temperature. And through a set of pumps, valves, heat exchangers, we can make that heat available as hot water or even as cold water to a customer. And the second source of heat, if we go to the right side of your screen, are the exhaust gases. So once we leave the container, we treat the exhaust gases for emissions, and we can discuss emissions in detail at a later stage or maybe after the webinar, but these are low emission, lean burn engines that have additionally, exhaust gas treatment included always in our supply for a plant in California. So we treat the exhaust gases, and then we go into an exhaust gas heat exchanger that can either produce hot water, that can produce steam, or that can make further hot water available to produce chilled water if needed in a production process. And then we have other balance of plant components that are, again, pre-integrated in our system and that are needed for full functionality of the plant. So we have medium voltage components in case we have a medium voltage alternator, or low voltage components. We have a lube oil management system that is also pre-mounted in the container, urea tanks that are needed for the exhaust gas treatment system, and also a small control room that allows our operator under maintenance tech to take care of the unit and access the control system directly from the package. And I think at this point, I would hand over to Jeff so that you can have a look at what we can do when it comes to the investment attached to such projects. Jeff, maybe let's move to the next slide, and I'll pass the word back to you.
Yeah, thank you, Carlos. And really found the case study you presented from Santa Barbara County to be pretty fascinating, not only from a technical standpoint, but also, you know, some of the economics that you referred to in relation to you know, the all-in cost of electricity in relation to what would be paid to Edison on the time of use aid account. So you know, looking to kind of tie it all together here on this slide, you know, creating a plan, you know, whether it's operational, business, or both, for resiliency at a facility. You know, there's really a few key ideas that you know, we want to touch on here as you think about planning. So first, it's important, as Carlos, you know, described, you know, to understand how energy is used at a facility, and what it costs. You know, where are the load centers electrically, potentially thermally, for steam, gas, chilled water, and then, you know, what's your current, you know, business as usual cost of you know, delivering those energy services to the facility are. You know, secondly, you need to, you know, kind of take stock of what the perceived risk of PSPS events are in relation to your facility operations, health and safety, you know, cost of a shutdown, and be able to, you know, as difficult as it is, be able to estimate reasonable ranges of costs associated with those outages. As we showed in an example from Southern California, you know, the customer had calculated you know, a value of about $120,000 of avoided costs due to PSPS events. Could be larger, you know, depending on, you know, how many PSPS events are suffered in the future. And then, you know, the third idea here is that you know, the type of energy application, you know, needs to be defined, right? So, you know, with these baseline assumptions in hand, you know, the thought process, you know, needs to pivot to you know, what are the critical priority loads at a facility? Can the facility accommodate a load shedding scheme during an island mode operation? Some facilities require full requirements during island mode. Others have the luxury of being able to shed non-priority loads. So those are important conversations to be had, and kind of drive, you know, the size, shape of the you know, distributed energy resource applications that could be implemented, you know, to manage through successfully during a PSPS event requiring island mode from the grid. but also, trying to optimize and strike that balance to deliver, the 10, 20, 30% cost savings for the rest of the year that Carlos referred to. And that really brings up, sort of the last key point is, what are the goals for annual energy savings? What's the view on increasing electrical costs and the need to hedge those into the future? And then, once that information is organized and there's alignment internally at the organization around the risks, the costs, and sort of the right size and shape for a solution, then, the discussion is around, the execution model. And, for distributed energy resources, whether it's cogen, solar, battery, wind, there are two basic execution models, as probably everybody on this call is generally aware. There's energy as a service, or PPA type structures where a third party is accountable for the capital investment and performance of the assets under a long-term agreement. And the customer really allocates most of the risk to the third party provider of that, and that can be a good solution, for organizations that are more capital constrained or risk averse or both. The trade-off, of course, is that there's a cost of capital associated with that, and it can otherwise reduce energy savings, but there's still tremendous value, and 100% of the savings and resiliency benefits flow to the account, not the third party provider. The second basic model is design build, or EPC, energy engineering procure construct. This can be a good option if an organization has more internal engineering resources, but most importantly, budget capacity, to self-fund a project. So these are the two, basic pathways, to execute, and then, after commissioning of the facility, there are different options for operations and maintenance. Usually, energy as a service that's handled by the third-party service provider under design build or EPC. That can be put out to contract, or it can be a hybrid of internal customer operations and facility personnel, and perhaps a long-term service agreement for certain parts and maintenance activities. And it also depends on the type of performance guarantee that the customer is looking for. So lots of different pathways, but the journey really begins with just that initial kind of planning and evaluation process within the organization. To first agree or disagree that there is a risk with PSPS events, and two, energy savings is a desirable outcome from such a project, and then that kind of drives the process and decision trees forward from there. So, I'd like to conclude there and turn it back to John, so we can use the remaining 10 minutes or so that we have left to answer questions from the audience.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Jeff and Carlos. Thank you for your remarks. Much appreciated. So as Jeff mentions, we go into the Q&A session now. We have about a few more minutes left before the top of the hour. If I could remind you to use the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. But I have received one question coming in through on the chat line as well, which I'll start with. Perhaps you could both address this. What are the utility interconnection requirements, please?
This is Jeff. I'm happy to lead off, and Carlos, if you'd like to chime in as well. But the interconnect process here in California is all governed by what's called Rule 21, which was established by the California Public Utility Commission. and is implemented and enforced by the utilities here in the state. The process that you go through will be dependent on a couple of variables. One will be the size of your distributed energy application. Two would be whether it's renewable, eligible renewable generation, such as solar and wind, like we talked about before, or if it will be cogeneration, as Carlos described earlier in the presentation. But really, it generally can begin with a pre-application to the utility, which will give you an indication of your local substation bank and breaker capacity. In almost all cases, certainly for cogen, we're looking at non-export, which is a little different and easier process to go through rather than if you're trying to sell power back to the grid under a wholesale distribution access tariff. Net energy metering for renewables is generally an easier process. But for cogeneration, we're seeing for the projects we're involved with for non-export, a process that takes about 4 to 6 months, from pre-application to completing the interconnect agreement or interconnection application, the utility completing the supplemental review report, and which shows you pass-fail results and required mitigations to parallel with the utility. All that takes about 4 to 6 months, sometimes more, depending on the queue and other factors. But hopefully that helps put some of the answer together. Carlos, I'm not sure if you have anything to add.
Jeff, yeah, maybe just a couple of words on one of the topics that you covered, which is a very relevant one, and that is export into the electricity grid. So when we're talking about non-renewable systems, low emissions natural gas fuel systems, officially and actually there is an incentive for high efficiency cogeneration facilities in California to export to the grid at incentivized rates. But the interconnection requirement and process linked to that incentive is quite substantial, and it will change the timeline of the project in a quite relevant way. So unless, and all in all, we have seen with multiple customers that we have evaluated that very specific conditions need to exist for that incentive to actually move the needle on a cogeneration project. So when it comes to industrial facilities, natural gas fueled facilities, thinking of energy savings and resiliency, the 95% of our customers will go ahead with a behind the meter generation option rather than thinking of export. That remains to be an option, but it would truly be a non-standard one.
Happy to take that conversation offline. With the participant or participants that raised that, John.
Great. Okay. Thanks very much, Jeff. And Carlos, our next question is, are there system size minimums or maximums for this type of technology?
That's a very interesting question. I'll try to keep an answer simple. Technically, no. Technically, you have cogeneration systems that are 30, 50 kilowatts. And yes, there is an upper limit, of course, for cogen systems for distributed generation. The limitation actually, so technically, there is not a limitation. Economically, there is a very clear limitation. So there are strong economies of scale that apply on cogeneration projects. So if a unit is 50 kilowatts or a unit is 500 kilowatts or 5,000 kilowatts, still there is an internal combustion engine involved. There is usually a package involved. There are balance of plant components involved, engineering involved. So economies of scale tend to play a relevant role in these projects. And if you go towards very small units, it will be very difficult for a project to pencil out. So it really depends on the economics of the specific project. If a customer is paying 20 cents for electricity, then probably a good cogeneration project can pencil out even with a small unit. But if a customer is more in the usual 14, 15, 16, 17 cents per kilowatt hour, then as a cogeneration project that is too small, it will find difficulties in penciling out. Jeff, maybe you want to add something here on my end. That's, let's say, the beginning of a conversation that we could take offline.
Yeah, it kind of goes back to one of the earlier slides where we showed the 24-hour electric and thermal load profile. In effect, you look at that over the course of a year, or 8,760 hours, and develop a load duration curve, and then through scenario and sensitivity analysis in a model with a tariff engine, you can model different sizes to optimize the size of the application against energy savings, which, as Carlos noted, doesn't always mean that you're trying to clip 100% of your peak demand. But if there's a specific island mode requirement for that, it may necessitate sizing at that if there's no opportunity for load shed, depending on the critical nature of an operation.
All right, okay, thanks very much. Obviously, if there's any follow-up needed from the questioners about any of these answers, please don't hesitate to contact us direct. Another question for you. From a price point of view, installed diesel is always going to be cheaper than putting in a new system. For something that's used only occasionally, why not stick with what we've got?
This is Jeff. Good question. So true, yeah, diesel generators, very proven, available technology, unless you're trying to get one during fire season, of course. I guess the counterpoint would be that these are assets that are going to sit idle at a facility for most of the year, and due to air district restrictions here in California, we'll be limited in terms of operating hours. And while they may be beneficial during a PSPS event, they're not going to do anything to help clip that electric bill from PG&E or others here in the state for the rest of the year, which is really kind of the second big idea from this webinar. And then there's always the issue during a PSPS event and wildfire. How do you ensure that you can secure fuel supply chains are somehow disrupted? So good technology, it works, but I think there's other considerations and money that could be left on the table. Carlos, anything you'd like to chime in on there?
Yes, I would add a couple of ideas. One of the main point. Diesel addresses one of the two challenges or problems that need to be faced when it comes to distributed generation and to on-site generation compared to just buying power from the grid. Diesel can provide resiliency. So if there's an outage, a diesel unit can provide emergency or backup power for a limited amount of time because of the fuel available at the site. There might be challenges to fuel supply during specific seasons. And also, as Jeff was mentioning, because of air regulations related to the Californian, to CARB, basically. So there are limitations in diesel units providing resiliency solutions, but diesel units are indeed designed to provide backup backup power. Diesels do not solve the challenge of energy costs. So a cogen unit, such as the one that you saw before, addresses not only resiliency, but principally and traditionally addresses energy savings. So a diesel unit will not save you on energy costs all year long. And the diesel unit will simply provide power through an outage. And maybe going back to the first of the 2 points that I'm mentioning, case in point is one of the customers that we have in Southern California. They had 2 times 2 megawatt diesels on site to provide resiliency in case of grid outages, specifically during high temperature days, very hot days during the summer. They're basically a vegetable grower in California. What happened is that the diesels did not operate, and Jeff was touching on maintenance and on the characteristics of an idling or system that is usually sort of based versus a system that is usually operating. The systems did that as expected, and they did not provide power through the resiliency through the outage. So basically, that's why the customer decided to install 6 megawatts of cogeneration. So diesel addresses the problem, but only partially, and maybe not as reliably as cogeneration could.
Great. Okay. Well, look, I think as we're now a couple of minutes past the hour, I think we can call it a day there. Thank you very much to you both for your very interesting remarks, and thank you to all the people who dialed in today. We hope this has been of interest to you. Just to remind you, if you have any further questions or comments, please feel free to get in touch with our colleague Retta Maynard, whose email address is on this final page here. Also, if we did a presentation last week to finance managers about this same topic with some interesting ideas about how to fund and finance these projects. If you'd be interested in learning some more information about that, please don't hesitate to call us. Well, we look forward to hearing from you again, and thanks again for participating in today's webinar. Thank you.